So I'd like to try these 4 practice problems, but before we do that, there is a certain skill that we really need to get down. And that is the idea of labeling the 3 sides of a right triangle. So for all these problems, you're always going to be given an angle. So let's say that you are standing right there. That is your position. From here, these 3 sides have a corresponding name. For sure, across the right angle, that is always going to be the hypotenuse, the one that's crooked, if you will. The one that forms an L, you see the 2 sides that form an L, those are the legs. So you have to give them the correct labels. So from this person's point of view, if you go across them, that side is called the opposite. And process of elimination means that this is the adjacent. So whenever I do labels, I always label the hypotenuse, then I label the opposite, and process of elimination is our friend, adjacent. Now, what if the little person goes up here now? So let's say that they're positioned right there. In that instance, this is still the hypotenuse, but now this is their adjacent, and this would be their opposite. Yes, yes? Now, what if we just mess things up a little bit? What if the person's right here? Well, the hypotenuse is still this one there. That doesn't change. And the opposite, you go across to the open space there, process of elimination there. Okay, what if they're right here? Well, the hypotenuse is still the hypotenuse. It's just now this is the opposite, and this would be the adjacent. So anytime I'm given a triangle, I always label H, O, and A for adjacent, hypotenuse, and opposite with respect to where you are positioned. So let's get rid of that. So let's begin with these problems here. So given this triangle, I want to label all my 3 sides. So I am positioned right there. We are at the angle that is given. Let me leave that here. So if I'm here, I know that this is the hypotenuse. And I know that across from me, this is my opposite. Process of elimination, this is the adjacent. So in this triangle, I have an angle and 2 sides. But which 2 sides am I given? You see, there's something there and there's something there. So I need to use a hypotenuse and the adjacent. I'm going to ignore opposite because there's nothing there. There was nothing given to me on the paper. This and this is what I have. So I have hypotenuse and adjacent. That helps me to narrow down which of the 3 functions I'm supposed to play with. Perhaps you saw this in class, SohCahToa. So am I going to use sine or cosine or tangent? Well, what were we given? We were given hypotenuse and adjacent. We were given H and A. Look, H and A. So we're going to use a cosine model. This is the function that we need to use. Sometimes it's sine, sometimes it's cosine, sometimes it's tangent. For this problem, since I was given hypotenuse and adjacent, I use C, which is cosine. And this is the setup. They're always set up like this. You pick the correct function, in this case cosine. In here, I need a fraction, an angle rather. In here, I need the angle, and here I need a fraction. So what's the angle that we're playing with? The angle is 36. Now, what goes here, what goes there? Well, it's adjacent over hypotenuse. So it's adjacent over hypotenuse. What's my adjacent? That's where the label comes in clutch. My adjacent is X. The bottom is the hypotenuse, because it's always this over that, this over that, this over that, this over that. Just depends on which function you're playing with. We're playing with cosine. So it's adjacent over hypotenuse. So the hypotenuse goes in the denominator. The hypotenuse is 12. So now, forget this and forget that. Only worry about this equation. I need to solve this equation for X. So what we can do here in red is we can get X by itself by getting rid of the denominator. By multiplying both sides by that denominator. So that here, those are gone. Make that a little bit bigger. And now the final answer is whatever my calculator says. I am going to make sure that my device is set to degrees. I'm not sure if you have radians or degrees on yours, or if you're using this calculator or an iPhone or whatever, but I'm going to make sure that I'm in degrees because we're using degrees. So now I'm going to type in 12 times cosine of 36, and that would be the answer there. I don't know how they want you to round. I'll call it 9.7. So for this problem, I would say that x equals about 9.7, because this was 9.7 is approximately x. Final answer. So over here, this is your angle. So this is where you are. That's a little stick figure. So label your three sides. The side that's crooked, that's the hypotenuse. It's always across the 90. Now, directly across from you is the opposite. Process of elimination, that's the adjacent. Which two sides are we given? We're given this here and that there, because there's something there. There's something there. So I need something that interacts a hypotenuse with an opposite. Which one of these interacts a hypotenuse with an opposite? H and O. This one, because that's opposite and hypotenuse. So my setup would be, for S, it's going to be sine something equals a fraction. You always put the angle here. The angle here is 29. And my fraction is opposite over hypotenuse. The opposite side was 16. The hypotenuse was W. So now again, forget this and forget that. Only worry about this equation. How can I solve this equation? Well, I don't like how the variable's in the bottom. So let me get rid of the denominator. Let me multiply both sides by W. W there, W there. These are gone. So we have left W times sine of 29 equals 16. Now look, sine of 29, it's just a number. That's all it is. So you can divide by that number to get W alone. And then we can type that in. And we can round this answer so that W is about 33, close to 33. Now, so this is where we are positioned. That's stick figure. And this is the hypotenuse. Directly across from you is the opposite, which makes us the adjacent. So which two sides are we given? We're given adjacent and hypotenuse. So we're using adjacent, we're using cosine. So we have cosine of the angle equals a fraction. And here is always the angle. The angle is a mystery. I don't know the angle. So call it a letter from the alphabet. How about x? It's a commonly used variable. So that's the angle x. And cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. My adjacent is 4. My hypotenuse is 13. So you see, now the goal is here. So that's why this problem is different from the other two. How do I get x alone? I have to get rid of cosine, but I can't divide by cosine. It's just not, cosine's not a number. It's a function. So here's what you do. Take the cosine inverse of the left, cosine inverse of the right. Because cosine inverse and cosine, they knock out. And that exposes x. So x is alone. And then here, that's calculator. If you look in your calculators, there should be a feature that says cosine inverse. You can see it right there in yellow. It says cosine inverse right there. So I'm going to hit shift, and then it says cosine inverse. And then I'm going to type in the fraction, which was 4/13. I'll hit enter, and that's my angle, about 72 degrees. 72 degrees. And I put a degree symbol because it was an angle. One more. So this is the goal x, and this is the hypotenuse. Across from me is my opposite. Process of elimination, that's the adjacent. And what do we have? I have these two objects, the adjacent and the opposite. So which function are we going to play with? Adjacent and opposite is tangent. So I have tangent of an angle equals a fraction. The angle is, darn it, I don't know the angle. Call it x. The fraction is opposite over adjacent. What's my opposite? My opposite is 5. My adjacent is 8. And now do the same thing. To get x alone, tangent has to go bye-bye. So we take tangent inverse of the left and of the right, because tangent inverse knocks out. X is alone. And then we type that in. Tangent inverse of 5/8 on your calculator you'll see that it's about 32 degrees. So try your problems and then let me know if you have any more questions.